Should we wait a couple minutes, you think?
I'd wait a couple
Okay.
minutes. Should be here.
Okay, so let's call to order the Planning Commission meeting for June 18th, 2019. Our first order of business, I believe, is to adopt the agenda. Do we need to move to adopt the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, so I move that we adopt the agenda.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, okay, the agenda is adopted. The next order of business is to approve the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting from May 21st, 2019. Yes.
I have a question, two questions on them. Just at the beginning of the second page, the back, Peter Nabel addressed the Plan Commission. Should we put a little summary of what he said? He took all the time to get up and say something. And then the next line down, Brownlee asked how the proposed changes would affect any developments. Should we kind of put a general answer to that too, or does it?
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay.
So the changes would be to just create a quick summary of what, I'm trying to remember his name from Golden Valley Land. What's his name?
Nabel.
Yeah, so a quick summary, hey. And then also a quick summary of the answer to the question that I guess
Right.
I asked, which was the effect on current developments, correct?
We can.
Good, okay. So with those changes in mind, I move that we approve the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting from May 21st, 2019. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So we have a fairly light agenda tonight. So to walk me through exactly how I apologize, this is my first time doing this, so if I butcher it. So we need to open up discussion.
First,
Staff report.
staff,
Yeah,
yep,
some
Paul will give the staff report.
Okay, all right. Paul.
Vice Chair, Commission. Before you today, we have a request for an amendment to the conditional use permit, which is 1751, regarding 2700 Rolling Acres Road, which is otherwise known as Mount Olivet Lutheran Church. They're asking for a potential change to one of the conditions, specifically a fence that was conditioned, and we can go into some detail about that particular fence. Some background on the issue. Mount Olivet Church was granted a conditional use permit to exceed the building height limit with the multi-residential zone MR on April 22nd, 2004, which was Resolution 0424. Mount Olivet Church was also granted an amendment to Resolution 0424 on June 23rd of 14 for the expansion of the existing building located at 7200 Rolling Acres Road, Resolution 1449. The resolution contained a condition that existing chain link fence on the north property line shall be replaced with a 6-foot opaque fence. The Mount Olivet Church was granted an amendment to the Resolution 1449 on July 24th, 17, for the approval of site plans and building materials for an addition to the Mount Olivet Church in Resolution 1751, with the condition that the existing chain link fence along the north property line shall be replaced with a 6-foot tall privacy fence, opaque privacy fence. The applicant, Nancy Nash of Mount Olivet Lutheran Church, has made application to amend the conditions of the conditional use permit, CUP, on Resolution 2017-51, that the applicant is proposing to extend the current white fence, known as current fence on the exhibit shown on the screen, approximately 18 feet to the west fence extension, and not to remove any part of the chain link fence. Staff has reviewed the submitted application and has found it to be complete.
Okay, so next step is Planning Commission questions of staff. Is that correct?
Yes, if you'd like, I have the two options, if you wish.
The
Or
two,
the-
two options we're considering.
Yes.
Right.
So what we're looking to do is staff is making no particular recommendation, but rather for the commission to make recommendation to City Council to either make no change on the current CUP and to have the chain link fence replaced as required by Condition 5 of Resolution 2017-51, or amend the current CUP with Condition 5 of Resolution 2017-51 as presented by the applicant.
And you want to note why we're not making a recommendation?
Right. The reason why we're not making a recommendation is because we're looking just for clarification on the current condition for the CUP. We want to make sure that it's very clear as to what's expected.
This really is an interpretation question, something that was approved in the city council resolution, and it has really no zoning or comprehensive plan guidance to it. So that's why one reason why the staff's not making a recommendation. Normally we would, and we'd make the recommendation based on the comprehensive plan or some type of zoning provision.
Okay, so we're being asked to, can we ask questions now? Okay, so we're being asked to create a motion for the city council, to recommend to the city council that either these conditional use permit stand as is, which is requiring a fence that goes, it's 600 and whatever the number of feet are in the current conditional use permit. Is that correct?
That's it.
Or we recommend that an exception be made, and then are we being asked to, because the exception is, there's this exception, but there's also an exception that's 400 and some odd feet that is another sort of option, correct?
Correct. That was proposed by a letter that was presented by the attorney of the owners to the north of the property.
So are we being tasked then to make a specific recommendation to the city council about which path makes the most sense?
I would say that's correct.
Correct. Okay. So there's potential in this case for there to be more than one motion. If members of the planning commission disagree, we could have multiple motions.
That is correct. If you can't find, typically you make a motion. If there's agreement on that motion would pass. If you make a motion and there's not agreement, then you'd have to make another motion. And typically what you'd want to do is just have a discussion first to find out where it's lying. And then once you've kind of figure out how many votes you have or who's supporting what, then somebody would make a motion.
Okay.
After the hearing.
Right, after the public hearing.
Right. So okay, I'll ask a couple questions to start off with. So this, the conditional use permit was originated in 2014 and essentially reasserted in 2017. Is that an accurate way to say kind of what? In other words, this has been reviewed twice, and both times the conditional use permit was to build the fence.
Right, so the first resolution was passed in 2004. So it was 0424. And that was for exceeding the limit height of building heights in that district. There was a second resolution that was made that basically allowed for the expansion of an existing structure. At the time, the staff members, instead of creating a new resolution, they amended the original one and added the provision of an existing chain link fence on the north property line, which will be replaced with a 6-foot opaque fence. Sometime later, in 2017, because they had to submit their site plans and their building plans for official review, there was an amendment done to that resolution, again, the 14 resolution, to include those building plans. And then they also reasserted the chain link fence along the north property line shall be replaced with a 6-foot tall opaque privacy fence. And so that's where we're at now is we're at that juncture where that fence needs to be built. And the question that the applicant now, Nancy Nash of Mount Olivet Church, is requesting the condition be defined along the image that you see on the screen here. And so that's where we're at now. I mean, we have a letter that was sent by staff. I believe it was, I have to go to it here. And I'll pull it up here as well. That one of the requirements, if it's okay if I'll show it on the screen here. It was sent by staff that they must complete the fence along the north property line. It needs to be installed as required by City Council. And so the response back essentially was, how much fence? And I think the intention of staff was to have the whole fence, but there was ambiguity. There's some ambiguity there.
And the whole fence is the 600 number,
Correct.
all the way down to the lake.
Correct.
And one of the things that staff did was got the property owner to the north and the Mount Olivet people representing Mount Olivet together in a meeting and tried to come up with some resolution and to walk the fence. And they didn't come up with a resolution, and that's why we're here tonight.
Okay. Questions from the commission?
The wrought iron fence that's there now, when was that installed?
I'm not for sure. I'm not certain.
Okay.
Might be a question for the applicant.
Correct.
Because it's on a retaining wall. And I would assume that all that work was done at one time.
And that image there is looking north with Rolling Acres to the east, right?
Right, you're looking northeast, yeah.
So the first, whatever that is, 100 feet or 200 feet or whatever it is currently a wrought iron fence on top of the retaining wall.
On top of the retaining wall, correct.
And the fence in question here extends parallel to that. I mean, it's a continuation of this fence down to the lake.
Along the property line. Some feet away, some feet north. You can almost see by the accessibility sign and the blue recycling or dumpster container, there's an outline of a bit of a fence in the background.
And this wrought iron fence is not in question.
That is not the question.
Yeah, it's, okay, you can see it there.
But it's
So
not opaque.
Right, that's not the portion in question. It's further back, where the chain link fence is.
Okay,
It's into the
I see.
shrubberies and woods.
So if we were to follow precisely what the city council stated in 2014 and 17, you would have wrought iron fence for that initial phase, and then you'd have a 6-foot opaque fence from there to the lake. Well, that's the question.
Unclear.
Question. Right, I understand.
It says chain link fence on the CUP.
If I may jump in. So the wrought iron fence is this dark gray that wraps around the new parking lot. The fence that they installed is a screen fence, and I believe what the applicant is suggesting is to add this extension.
Right.
I believe that's correct.
That current fence space is the current opaque fence. That is, the wrought iron fence goes from there to the east towards Rolling Acres.
Correct.
Correct.
And so the applicant wants to simply add more opaque fence in the red section and leave the chain link fence. And the question is, what is the intent of the city council with respect to that?
Correct.
And the need for the fence was triggered by the neighbor to the north?
I
Is that
suspect.
the original demands?
It was a neighborhood concern.
Well, it came in a package of conditional uses, correct?
Correct.
Right, so there was, the building height exceeded, and they received these conditional uses. But one of the conditions of that conditional use permit was that this fence would be built. Right?
On 14 and 17.
14 and 17. Any more questions from the planning commission? If not, then the next step would be go to the applicant's presentation, correct?
Or to open the hearing, yeah.
Do the applicant's presentation.
Okay.
Public hearing. Yep, you're right.
Are those two the same thing in this case?
Not normally. I would do the applicant presentation first.
Okay, all right. So we just declare that? Okay. Who goes first?
The applicant.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, okay. So we'll open the applicant's presentation now.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Nancy Nash, and I represent Mount Olivet Lutheran Church. Thank you for including us on your agenda tonight and reopening the CUP application and our questions regarding the fence. As Paul summarized in the timeline, this conversation has been ongoing since 2014 when Tom McNally, my predecessor, was approached by the Loverings with concerns about the parking lot and the lighting that would be happening with the building of the parking lot. With a goodwill agreement, Tom McNally agreed to install the fence as a barrier. We are here this evening mostly because of the different interpretation of the language in both the 2014 and the 2017 minutes. Mount Olivet has always been willing to provide a barrier, and the ambiguous language in the minutes is what needs clarification so we can move forward. My goal tonight is working together with the Planning Commission and the Loverings to better define and clarify what makes sense not only for the Loverings, but the property owners on the lake, Mount Olivet Church, and the Planning Commission community that you serve at large. Mount Olivet's intention has always been to work in good faith and install a fence to provide the adequate barrier. In fall of 2017, we met with Ben Landhauser, the former community development director, and received his approval for the current location of the fence we installed, the height and the length and the opaque nature. We now understand, due to the language in the minutes, that each of us has a different understanding of exactly what that means. We are 100% on board to remove the chain link fence, but want to clarify that our neighborly intention was to provide a barrier in all honesty, but never interpreted that to mean installing a fence to screen their entire property from Rolling Acres Road to the lake, which runs, according to the letter, about 643 feet. I'm not sure that the Planning Commission or the City Council ever imagined the magnitude of the vegetation loss that would occur if a new fence was installed where the current chain link fence lives. This area is very dense with vegetation on both sides of the existing fence. The vegetation includes mature trees, some which extend or exceed the height of 60 to 70 feet. And the lower group of shrubs and vegetation provide a heavy cover between the Loverings and Mount Olivet Church. Especially if we extend the wood fence from its current location west and a little south, it would be an excellent barrier and privacy. I do know that we could never build a fence high enough to provide the same protection that the very mature vegetation in the area now provides. Also to note that the vegetation not only provides a natural barrier, but also a sound barrier and an erosion barrier as we approach the lake. Also important to note is that originally this came from concern about parking lot lights, and with the current technology provided in lights, they have exacting cutoff shades that allow for lights to be situated and directed exactly where they need to be, which when we had that done only faced towards our parking lot and shut off on a timer every evening around 10 o'clock and face away from their household. Due to the fact that our parking lot does sit below Rolling Acres Road, as mentioned, the parking lot, exists a retaining wall that's about 15 feet high. The wrought iron fence, which doesn't allow a barrier, but just another little enclosure. The existing 25-foot fence, and both vegetation that's deciduous and evergreen, which provides protection. I want to make clear and hope that you hear that Mount Olivet is eager and agreeable to work with all parties involved. And I hope that we can make a decision, you can make a decision that makes sense for everyone involved. We're willing to do the following: remove the chain link fence that's embedded in the vegetation as requested, extend the existing fence which was installed in 2017 and toward the lake, which would provide an additional barrier, and plant some additional evergreens. Were we to put the fence in the chain link area, we know that we would have to cut a swath on 5 feet either side of the chain link fence in order to install the footings necessary to secure the fence, which would just provide a big scar and a swath down the middle of this pristine natural barrier that's already there. So we hope that we can save the natural green space and continue the views from the lake for the boat owners and the lake property owners, and provide the Loverings the additional privacy that they are looking for. Do you have any questions of me?
So we can open up now for questions from the Planning Commission. Questions?
Why is it 5 feet? What requires the 5 feet swath? Is that just to make it easier for them to install it, less labor, or is there a way to do it with less?
The depth and the breadth of the vegetation and the roots and the trees that would need to be removed in order to adequately install the fence.
Because the fence isn't that wide.
No, the fence is your normal, narrow
They're trying to drive a
fence.
truck
But
down
to get
through there,
equipment,
drive some equipment down through there.
to get the adequate equipment to deal with the vegetation.
What was envisioned originally in terms of what they were going to do?
Our original vision, and I've spoken with Tom McNally, was just to provide, once the parking lot was up, just the fence along the one we built, we thought was, adequate. It's opaque wooden fence to just give them the shield and the privacy they were looking for.
It's tough to see. I went and drove by it. It's kind of tough to see this time of year because the vegetation's all out. So I back up to some homes and there's vegetation right now. I can't see them, but in the winter I can see them.
Sure.
So you almost would have to see it in the winter to understand how much the vegetation really cuts down on that.
Sure. And we can plant some evergreens if that helps provide additional barrier too that is, constant.
And I would certainly think that would be the solution overall, is to do additional landscaping to, essentially camouflage the existing layout of the land. And is that reasonable to do that at the same time?
Sure. I mean, we could we're open to that.
Okay.
Well, then I guess we're back to how far down it has to go, right?
Right.
How big those trees have to be. So we're still kind of questioning this issue of how far that needs to go.
Right. Yeah. And, right.
On this plan, the red line with the arrows, this indicates what the Loverings thought that they were going to get for a fence in the beginning. Is that correct?
You know, I don't want to speak for the Loverings, but
Okay.
I believe they thought the fence would go, based on their letter from their attorney, from Rolling Acres Road, replace it where the chain link fence is, all the way down towards the lake.
So
But they-
an a complementary question to that. In 2014, because it seems to me like our job here is to interpret what the city council decided a couple times. So in 2014, what was the status of the chain link fence at that point? Is it the same chain link fence that's been there since?
Since I'm going to guess 65, when Rolling Acres was there. Yep. Because there's trees through it. And
So the language from the council says that the existing chain link fence on the north property line shall be replaced with a 6-foot opaque fence, right? So what in your view is the ambiguity in terms of what the city council was trying to get across there?
So the ambiguity just lied where we thought that the fence, when we met with Ben and said, this is what we're thinking of where a fence would provide a good barrier. And he said, yes, that is adequate. I agree with you. Unfortunately, that wasn't ever documented, and he's moved
It
on.
also runs contrary to what the city council said, right? I mean, that assessment would be contrary to what, I'm just going strictly speaking. by what the
Totally.
council
That's
said.
the ambiguity of the language. Because it also doesn't say, well, I mean, it does say the length of the chain link fence, but
Existing fence as it was, which was at that point the same as it is today.
Correct.
All the way to the lake.
yep, you're right.
So where the current fence is the chain link fence still there? So there's two fences next to each other?
So there's about, yes, I mean, it's just in a little bit further.
I wonder if the issue of disturbing the natural undergrowth was discussed in 2014. There's no way to know that. 'Cause it seems to me 10 feet of bushes and trees is a lot to remove, and it's a shame to remove them, but I'm just a tree hugger.
Right, yeah. So I guess another question kind of along those lines then, if you have to remove 5 feet on both sides of the fence, if there's going to be a new fence and you have to remove 5 feet on both sides of that new fence, then the first 5 feet would be from where the fence is today, 5 feet, and then that new fence would actually be 5 feet onto your property, correct? Because you're not going to be entitled to clear 5 feet of their property, right?
Well, no, but that was the ambiguity of the language too, or the minutes too, because the chain link fence is right on the property line. So in order to get, we can remove the chain link fence and come in, but then I would, propose that we just extend where we have the existing one now, because then we don't have to take out the
But
greenery.
If indeed the contractor is saying that you have to have 5 feet on either side of the new fence in order to build it,
The fence, the fence installer.
that fence sort of by definition then would have to be 5 feet onto your property, the new fence, right?
I guess so. I mean,
Because otherwise you'd be clearing the first 5 feet of their property.
sure, right. But that's where, with where it says replace chain link fence, it makes it sound like it has to be exactly where it was. So is that an amendment then to where those, minutes, that's where it gets a little confusing if we're,
Yeah, I'm not sure
going to
the
go
city council
exacting.
was making a decision with respect to how the fence would be built.
Exactly. Right.
A matter of construction, is it possible to use the existing fence as the support for the new fence?
No.
Overlay?
I'd be surprised, no.
No?
No,
How come?
because it's two different types of footings and two different types of material that you're putting in.
I know that, but isn't there a way to just take this opaque material and cover the fence with it on the neighbor's side?
How tall is that fence?
It's not 6 feet. It's probably,
4 feet, probably.
I mean, it's your run-of-the-mill chain link, circa 65.
But I guess in our packet, there's a letter from the Lovering's attorney agreeing to the 430 feet, which wouldn't go down to the lake, which would save the view from the lake, from the boaters and whatever. I mean, this is just a compromise letter that between Rolling Mount Olivet and the Loverings, that they're saying, well, we would compromise and just go 430 from Rolling Acres down and not affect those trees. And I don't know where that 430 would end.
It's actually, I think, the red.
Right, but I mean, as far as with the new building and the parking lot, physically, how far that goes down, I mean, you'd have the swath that you would see from Rolling Acres looking
Right.
toward the church, but as far from the lake, coming back, looking at
Up.
the church, looking up, you wouldn't really notice the fence at that point. And to me, it seems like that's a compromise that if they're happy, you'd be happy, the city would be happy. And the homeowners on the lake wouldn't see the 10-foot swath that was cut out for 20 years or till it grew back in.
Right.
Before the planning commission gets too far into coming up with compromises or solutions, I think you might want to open the public hearing and
Are you, is there anything else from your presentation?
No,
Okay,
thank you.
Appreciate it, thank you. Okay, so do we need to move to open? Okay, so I move that,
you don't need to move to open it, you need to move to close it when you do get around to closing it.
okay, so we're in open session now.
You can open the public hearing now.
All right, so the public hearing is open. If anybody wants to speak on this matter, now's the time.
Good evening. My name's Chris Lovering. I live at 7100 Rolling Acres Road. And I do have a presentation. Oh, thank you. So just use the clicker here. Okay.
Exactly.
So thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I appreciate it. Full disclosure, I'm a city employee. I'm a paid on-call captain in the fire department. I never thought in a million years I'd have to hire an attorney to get a neighbor and a church to live up to a commitment they've made on multiple occasions. And you can see that I'm extraordinarily frustrated and disappointed in this process because I've been going through it for 5 years. This is the third time I've been in front of this group, I think, and if this goes to council, it'll be the fourth time that my wife and I are in front of council on this particular topic. So I was grumpy this morning when I woke up because at 6:30 this morning, I heard the backup beeps of the construction equipment from the Mount Olivet Church construction site woke me up, followed by concrete saws. Now, the city ordinance is 7 a.m. This happens frequently. I was told by the city to call the police, but we know with the break-ins and everything else, our police have a much more important job than enforce ordinances at 7 a.m. for construction. So that just exacerbated my grumpiness when I reviewed the proposal again from the Mount Olivet to get out of this process that they've been trying to get out of this fence for the last 5 years. So if you don't mind, I've got a few slides. I'll go through quickly a timeline of how we got to where we are today and address the information that the church sent directly. So as these guys shared, in 2014, we had the conditional use permit. We worked closely with the city and the city development manager at the time to find a way to counteract the negative impact of replacing a residential building with a 97-spot parking lot that was next to our house. And the compromise in the end, because to your point, Laura, we thought putting an opaque fence instead of that wrought iron fence around the parking lot would make a lot of sense. But the church, in language that they specifically provided, agreed to remove the existing chain link fence on the north side of the property and replace it with a 6-foot opaque fence. This was the church's language. This wasn't our idea. This was their idea from the beginning. This was their intent. So we move on to 2017, and I was surprised when the plans for the church construction came out, and there's no plans to do the fence. We'd gone through an enormous process to make sure that this opaque fence was included last time around, and it wasn't included in the 2017 proposal from the church for the construction project. So again, I reached out to Tom McNally on my own and got him to commit personally to, again, build this fence. And again, we went through the city council, and they had a resolution to, again, build the fence. So all this construction happens. The 97-spot parking lot is created in 2017, and I'm waiting all summer long for that fence to be built because we've got an open parking lot. Our bedroom is on the front of our house. The lights from that parking lot, even though it's lower in some parts, right where it comes up to the bedroom at the turnaround in the front of the church, those lights come right through our front windows of our bedroom all night long. I reached out to Ben and indicated that I'm going to go back to council and ask them to close the parking lot until this fence is made. Miraculously, in November, a small piece of non-opaque, non-conforming fence went up. I thought, great, we've got a temporary solution to this problem. I'll be patient and wait until next spring when they can actually remove and replace the existing chain link fence with an opaque fence. Well, there's changes in terms of community development managers. In the spring, I reached out and connected with Pat, and Pat indicated he talked to the church, and the church was done building fence. They thought they had lived up to the commitment that they'd made in the process, and they were done. That's why I had to hire an attorney. So the attorney worked with the city, and they recognized that they had not complied with the resolution of the council and went forward. And Pat was kind enough to organize a meeting between Mount Olivet and ourselves where I thought I understood, we had an agreement of 430 feet of fence because they actually plotted the site. They got a bid from the contractor, and they've included all of this in. We compromised. We didn't want the whole thing. We'll take 430 feet. They got the bid from the contractor. They plotted the site. They did the planning, and I thought we were good to go. So then, again, wait the whole summer. The second summer without a fence, lights continuing into our house, no fence. So in November, the church reaches out and offers to pay us to build a fence. Instead, they will give us the money for the bid for the contractor to build this fence. Now, I had realized that I did not want to do any projects, A, because at this point I didn't trust the church, and B, I'd spent the winter fixing my ceiling that had cracked as a result of what I think, I can't prove, but what I think is a result of the construction of the parking lot adjacent to our home. So we declined that offer, and they reached out and said, okay, we'll understand. We'll let you know what the plan is. And then I got information from the planning group saying that they're having this meeting, so I just assumed they wanted to clarify that we're going to do this 430 feet of fence. But that didn't happen. It's clearly they want to do 18 more feet of fence and call it done. So, as you can see, I went back to 2014 from the Victoria Gazette, and if you look at the bottom paragraph there, Mount Olivet was asked by the resident to the north to replace the existing chain link fence with a 6-foot opaque fence. Said Tom McNally of Mount Olivet, we're willing to do that, absolutely. So the intent from the church has been clearly communicated to us all along that they are on board to build this fence. If you look at the next slide, you can see the bottom left arrow and the bottom right arrows, the two right arrows are markings of where they marked the property line. And the top left arrow, you can see a little yellow caution tape in there where they're marking off where they were going to have to build the fence. I was all excited. I thought this fence was going to be done last summer, and then I wouldn't be here again this summer. So so you could see, this is the clearly short portion of existing fence that we're talking about. You can see where it's right behind the existing chain link fence, and this is the angle that we get to our bedroom. So it is not opaque. We get car lights through there into our bedroom windows continuously going. So, to address some of the screening and vegetation comments, Mount Olivet says in their submission that currently the trees provide a natural barrier to sightlines. They did. They used to. There are some great pine trees right up front there that we were promised were going to stay because they were awesome. And they did stay until they hacked them up to about 8 feet so they could drive bobcats around there to install that wrought iron fence. So you can see that circle. You can see the view is right into the fence. There's no natural barrier to sight. And you can see that the guys were back there just smashing the limbs off. They weren't even cutting them when they actually went through this process. So the sight barriers don't truly exist. Now the other trees are, if you look on the left, a big dead tree that's waiting to fall in my garage. There's sick ash trees back there waiting to fall on my deck, and an enormous amount.
On your property or?
They're on the church property. An enormous amount of buckthorn. So all this heavy ground cover is buckthorn. And we've worked really hard to eradicate most of the buckthorn from our property, or at least keep it hedged so it doesn't bury. But now we have giant buckthorn trees that we're competing against throwing the berries onto our property from the church side. So you can see on the right side, that is all buckthorn in there as part of this 430-foot swath of property. So one thing that I keep struggling with, and you struggle with as well, is this 10-foot swath that has to be created. And I'm shocked by that, and I've talked to other people in the industry, and they seem to think that that seems to be ridiculous in terms of the pure width of 5 feet on either side of the fence. And actually, if you look at the existing fence, that small portion of fence, you can see how close it is to trees there. You can see the tape measure on that. That's 19 inches away from a tree. It's not 5 feet. And on the next slide, you can see that one is clearly 9 inches away from a tree. So when we were meeting with the church and they had their construction representative there, and I was pointing this out, that if you just followed the method that you've already used for construction of the fence, you don't have to create this 10-foot wide scar. I was given this and told I'm not arguing with you. That usually means you've won the argument, in my experience. So the last piece has been what has exasperated me, because in their submission, and I quote, Mount Olivet says they're genuinely concerned that the removal of necessary vegetation will have a direct hit on the bluff and shore impact. Now, number one, we compromised a long time ago on 430 feet. That's not all the way down to the lake. Number two, do they really need this 10-foot swath? Because their construction techniques before showed that they're 9 inches away from a tree. And three, if they can't control the erosion on a 10-foot swath, how do we have any confidence that they can control the erosion on this acre of devastation they've created? So you look to the left, you can see the building still there where the parking lot is. You can see the holding pond surrounded by trees. If you look at it now from your Google Maps, you can see an acre of trees are gone as part of this. So how do we have any confidence if they are saying they can't control the erosion of a 10-foot swath to make a fence, and people build fences every day, it's not complicated? Then how can we be confident they can control the erosion of that? And do I need to reach out to my Lake Association members and start bringing this up to this group? It creates real concerns for me. So finally, Mount Olivet is building a 48,000 square foot addition. They have a budget of $13.2 million, and their goal, which I 100% subscribe to, it's a fantastic goal, is to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to more people by providing greater opportunities for worship and education. I think the best way we can help them is to help them meet that goal by being a good neighbor, by living up to their commitments, by creating that 430-foot opaque fence that I thought we'd already agreed to and that we'd be here talking about today. And just to put it in all perspective, the $22,400 quote that the church has provided to you for building of the fence and removal of the chain link fence represents 0.17% of the budget for this whole project. I don't know why we're wasting everybody's time on this. I'm sure they even have better things to do. Thank you. I appreciate your consideration. Let me know if you have any questions.
The 430-foot compromise that you agreed to in 2018, does everybody agree that you're making that assertion here, but do all sides agree that was agreed to by both sides?
I can speak for us. I thought it was agreed to. They clearly
There's no
got
letter of
bids
intent
for
or
it. They got bids for it, articulating that 430 feet. So, and they plotted it out on the property, but there was no documentation of agreement.
Are you saying in your statement that the fence that's there today is not opaque?
Correct.
Because of you can see through it. So is your assertion that that fence needs to come down and it's a single fence that's built?
Correct.
One that's there comes out and a new fence?
Correct.
And then, does the city have a definition of opaque?
We don't have a definition as it pertains to fences. All we have is a reference in our fence code that speaks to industrial and commercial fences, and it speaks to whether or not you can see through it at a 90-degree angle.
So that definition, by that sort of, you're kind of applying that, but
It uses a logic.
this would be considered opaque by that definition because at a 90-degree angle.
What material was quoted in the 22,400? What's that fence material?
Just opaque privacy fence.
Was it wood? Was it?
Oh, in the quote from the
Yeah,
church,
something.
it was, I think it was cedar fence,
We have it here.
cedar fencing.
Yeah, 6-foot tall cedar wood fence.
Chanhasen's Public Development Department has a great picture of what an opaque fence is, and by their definition, and it is flat and you can't see through it, and it's very clear. Thank you, I know we're in Victoria.
The contractor that said that a 9-foot swath was needed for the construction, was that a commercial contractor or was that a residential contractor?
It's
Town and country.
Town and Country Fence.
Okay, so that would maybe residential. Okay, and I just asked because it seems to me a commercial contractor might think you'd need a larger span versus residential.
Is that the same one who built the 18 feet that's there now? The same contractor?
I don't know, you'd have to ask the church.
For the record, the answer was yes.
So if they can build it there with where it is, to your point about the pictures, why can't they go the full distance without removing all the trees?
Correct. They did it before.
Do you think that those posts could be reused and to create that
The metal
that
post,
design? Mhm.
metal chain link, no, because you're doing,
Well, not the metal, but the existing wood that's there now.
oh, the existing
carry through.
posts, the existing posts and fence, yeah,
Yeah, okay. For a different design that's
yeah.
more opaque.
Yeah, you could use the same, of the fence posts that are of the existing wooden fence, of the 18 feet you could use. To make it more opaque, you probably have to bring the boards closer together or,
Exactly.
Yeah, this is an alternate, they're calling out in their alternating board fence, which I presume is the same as the fence that's there today.
That's what I would assume.
More questions?
You're saying that's not opaque?
It is not
What they're
opaque.
proposing here is more of the.
Correct. It could be opaque if the alternating boards were closer together, but by definition of opaque is you can't see through it, and that is clearly not opaque.
And since that fence was built so within 9 inches of a tree,
Yeah,
it shows probably that if they're careful, they can do it without. And also that fence was right up next to a chain link fence in one of the pictures.
that's the existing chain link fence. Yep.
Existing, yeah.
your
Follow the intent
130-foot
of the
offer still
council and
stands,
plan
is what you're
Well,
saying.
let's do one at a time. Sorry.
I just think we should follow the intent of the original ordinance.
So let's get through the public hearing, and then we can close that, and then we'll deliberate
Good
as
point.
the commission before we,
Okay.
more questions,
So
members?
if all the trees are removed and a 6-foot fence is installed, does that give you the privacy that you need or the blocking of all the lights that you need?
Yes, it's truly, it's a bit of a sound barrier, because since they've cleared the trees up to that certain height, there's a lot of sound coming off the parking lot, and it's a bit, I know it's not gonna complete everything 100%, but it'll reduce it, and then it's a bit of a light, more of a, if we get the opaque fence, it'll be, and an extended fence, it'll be a light barrier from the cars pulling in to the church as well as in the lower parts of the parking lot.
I also think that it's more cost, what's the right word? It's more efficient to do the fence versus the evergreens. I think that the evergreens might cost a lot more, truly. Someone might tell me wrong, but you get the evergreens in that length, I think it would be way more.
Probably have to dig a lot bigger hole
Yeah.
to put one in.
I think so. I think you're right.
More questions? So the public hearing is still open. Do you have anything else?
I'm good,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The public hearing remains, is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
Hello, I'm Michael Brandt, one of the design professionals that's worked on this project from the beginning. The issue, the ambiguity of the issue that comes from that final city council statute saying the fence needed to be replaced from Rolling Acres Road to the lake, I think is an error from what the original intent was. The original intent was, because the parking lot was constructed, to provide a fence and/or natural barrier to block the lighting from the parking lot.
Do you mean the intent of the city council?
The intent of the planning commission when we were here before, comments from city staff, talking to Pat's previous predecessor, Ben Landhauser, in terms of how much would we need in terms of fencing and natural barrier to make sure we're not sending spillover light from the parking lot onto the adjacent property. The lights, as Nancy stated before, are cutoff lights. It's commonplace nowadays. It wouldn't get past any of your city staff as such, that the lights literally, if this is the property line, if this is the edge of the parking, the lighting stops there. The issue comes into whatever cars may be making the turn into the parking lot. In talking with Ben and other city staff, first, there were additional evergreens added into that corner where the fence was placed per that first phase of the project in order to eventually, takes time to grow up and provide that natural visible barrier so that the lights don't transfer over. The fence was then talked about after the council meeting, and nobody saw the final wording of the document. I think that's something that probably needs to change, especially in matters like this between two owners, that you see what's written and everybody truly understands it, because the ambiguity
The final wording of what document?
of the city council, how they wrote it. I was here that night.
The motion?
The
You mean
motion.
the
I was here
passed
that
by the
night.
City council?
Yep, I was here that night, and
We have that documented, don't we?
The final CUP we do.
Yeah.
With the
That
document.
would be documented in the conditional use permit, wouldn't it?
it was, I did not see it. I mean, it may have went to Tom at, being the owner of the property, but it didn't come out to all the design professionals. Had we saw that immediately, we would have said something and sent it back. The following week, we had our site meeting. Ben came out and we walked the property for two reasons. One, as you can see from the photos that have been sent by Nancy, the retaining wall is there and blocks the first, literally probably 100, 120 feet from Rolling Acres Road. There are no lights that are going to get above that because that wall is 10 feet tall. It has a wrought iron fence on top of it for fall protection so that nobody just wanders over to it and falls over into the parking lot. That's, again, from city staff review. The fence portion was walked off by Ben to provide, okay, if you go from here to here, that should block enough light, and per the city code, the way it's written, that type of fence, the lap wooden fence, is opaque at 90 degrees. That was put into place. The additional landscaping was put per the first phase of the project along that area to grow up. So, obviously after that point being brought up that you have to replace the entire fence, everybody's kind of surprised because it's about the parking lot lighting. When you look at the diagram, at the end of the green line is the edge of that parking lot. If the church is looking at it and walked off an additional 18 feet of what you can do, the site is also extremely hilly. It drops off immensely past that point down to the lake. There is no reason that the full 430 feet as a compromise would be required to block parking lot lighting when the building itself is in the way of that. So, just a comment. I don't know if you want any further questions or.
Any other questions for Mr. Brown? No questions. Okay, thank you, sir. Is there anybody else that wants to speak?
My name's Aaron Zabel. I'm the project manager for the general contractor on the project. And I just want to directly address some of the comments about the spacing from the trees. I've been involved in a lot of the meetings with the prospective fence contractors and also with some of the tree removal experts. And I just want to relay to you that the area where the fence was built was not nearly as densely populated with trees as beyond our proposed red line. It gets much thicker. So there will absolutely be trees in the way of the fence. So I just want to clarify that it would be necessary to remove a significant amount of trees to get to the 430-foot line.
Is that based on building it, replacing the current fence on the lot line, or would the same be true if you were building it further in to the church's property?
The same would be true. It's very dense with vegetation once you get past the proposed thicker red line.
I have a question for staff. And this might,
I'm sorry, should we close, just to make sure we get it right? Should we close first?
Correct.
And
Can I go back up?
absolutely, we're the public portion is still open, yep.
So just to follow up what they said, I don't believe this gentleman was in the original 2014 meetings that we had with the city and Tom McNally around the intent of the fence was to lessen the impact of removal of a residential building and building a 97-spot parking lot adjacent to our house. It wasn't just about lighting. It was about all the other things that come with a 97-spot parking lot next to your house. And then again, to address the point, there is a lot thicker vegetation, and a lot of it is buckthorn, and that I showed you in those pictures. So thank you. Any questions? Thanks.
Okay, I'd like to move that we close the public hearing. For a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the public hearing is closed. And so now the planning commission will deliberate. Okay,
So when we talk about the location of the fence, the existing fence is right on the property line. If it was to be more on either property side of the property line, let's say, is there enough flexibility within the land that's there where it comes a little bit more towards Mount Olivet to make a difference with trees being removed? Is that possible? And I don't think that has been addressed. So that's number one. Number two, could the fence go closer to the leverings? And potentially it might even be on their property line, but could an easement agreement be created? Curious if that's been discussed. That might be a solution. You know,
It's
obviously,
kind of hard to see here, but that's actually their house. And if you look, do we have an aerial picture of the area? Because it might be helpful to see that their house actually.
That is the house,
That's
right
actually, that's
there.
their house, right there. Maybe we can get it up for everybody to see, because I don't want to do it on here because everybody needs to be able to see it, but, if we could pull up an aerial map, so that's going to address.
yeah,
that
that's
kinda
close.
Clarifies
That's really close.
and it's, yeah, there we go. What do we do before we had Google Maps?
I use it daily.
Okay, so here's the fence, right? You can see the fence line, and you can see, it looks like it's 6, 8, 10 feet maybe at the most, just looking at based on the size of a car, that you couldn't drive a car between the fence and the house. right?
Yeah.
So it's 4 or 5 feet.
Okay.
So the trees being removed are no more than what was already removed, as shown by the one gentleman, right? When you look further down south there, those all got removed, but they kept these.
So I'll make a comment here that it appears to me that the intention of the council, all we have with respect to the intention of the council is what's written down. And in the conditional use permit, the intention of the council, which we have to take at its word, I think, it doesn't seem ambiguous to me at all. And it was, in fact, there's 2 motions or resolutions, one 1449 and one 1751, that both have the exact same verbiage, which is the existing chain link fence on the north property line shall be replaced with a 6-foot opaque fence. Now, at both in 2014 and in 2017, that same exact fence existed, and that was a 630-foot or thereabouts. It was a 630-foot fence that the city council at that point twice, 2 different city councils, said would be replaced. And that seems crystal clear to me. And so it's not clear to me why that wasn't done in the first place. And I guess part of the question that I would have about this is, based on what this city council decides, partly based on our recommendation, is at what point is the enforcement of that conditional use permit considered? Because this has been going on for 5 years now, right? And so what is if we were to recommend to the city council that they simply utilize the same exact language as they did before, twice, what goes into place to ensure that that's done?
So in pretty much every development, either residential or commercial, there's different stages in the development process. First one is tree removal. The next one is grading. Then once they do the grading, then they usually pull a building permit, build the building, and then finally a certificate of occupancy that you can legally go occupy the building. Each one of those stages in the development process, there'll be conditions that have to be met before you advance to the next stage. Unfortunately, under this conditional use permit, there's no stages outlined of when these items had to be done. So it was my interpretation that they are already building the building, so the most logical place for them to have to put the fence in would be before the occupancy permit. That's what I notified them, and that's what they're going towards, and that's why I think it's coming to a resolution that this fence has to be installed.
So Mount Olivet doesn't currently have an occupancy permit for this building, right?
Correct.
It's getting close to being done.
Correct.
Right, and they can't start using it until those conditions are met.
Right.
Right, okay. So I would put out there that this just seems pretty, I mean, it doesn't seem fair to me to have this reviewed multiple times and to come to a different conclusion than the planning commission, or than the planning commission and the city council have come to before. And that it seems to me is just really crystal clear. Now, the question then becomes whether or not it's exactly what they said, or we use the footage that the 2 parties appear to have had some form of agreement on. That's kind of the next question. So that I'm going to put that in. That's my thought.
I take back my tree hugger statement because I think those issues, I would hope, were considered originally when this plan was approved. And
Seeing how close their home is to this property line is just, there's no question that at that time, city council wanted to protect this property owner and their quality of life. There's no question. I'm disappointed they had to go through this for so long during the construction period. Truly.
I think Jesus would understand.
Well, I think that, if they would have put this fence up back in 2014, how much vegetation
Yes, that's right.
was there at that point?
That's right.
They did cut down, I mean, they cleared a bunch of trees to put the building in place. They could have put the fence up, and over the 5 years, or they would have grown, the fence would have been there. Nobody would be really sitting here discussing it. And my personal thing is that if the Loverings are fine with not going all the way to the lake with it, and they're only fine with the 430 feet,
Well, one thing.
that would be a compromise between the homeowner and the church, even though the city would say you needed to replace the whole 600 feet. The two property owners compromised by coming back and saying, this is what we're willing to do. Now,
That would be a change. If we made that our recommendation to the city council, that would actually be a change to the conditional use.
Yeah.
Because the conditional use is the entire length of the fence.
well,
And so the proposed motion is to either leave the condition as written or to recommend changing the condition. And one change would be to accept the applicant's changes, which is to not have to build a fence. The other is to shorten the length of the fence that they have to build, right? So that would be a change, in the, to just point that out.
I agree with what you're saying, but I also think that we need to better clarify opaque.
Yes.
And it needs to be very clearly stated what our expectation of opaque is.
We would have to rely on, it seems we would have to rely on something to, can we make that recommendation, or is that sort of statutory, or, do you know what I'm saying? Can we include a recommendation to the council with respect to the opaqueness of this fence? And one of the reasons I think that's an important thing to consider too is if you look at the house and the angle at which it looks at all of this stuff, that is not opaque from their perspective. Now, if you're standing here, but this is their driveway, that's their house, and their front patios, right? But I don't know what kind of leeway or authority we have to be able to make.
More solid fence would also help with noise. Because kids are kids, but I can imagine the youth group, they're out in the parking lot and they're playing their music, and all you hear in their house is boom, 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 boom. So I've been in a situation living next to a car dealer, so I'm a little emotional on the topic, but you're going to get some of that. So I think it needs to be solid, and if that's the word opaque, but I think it needs to be solid to also help reduce noise.
So since this is a conditional use permit amendment, also like variances, the planning commission, the city council can ultimately put more restrictive language than what is allowed in the ordinance.
Can the planning commission do that and recommend that more strictly?
Recommend.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, all right.
A solid fence, I agree, to protect the landowner.
The property owner is, reducing the length of the fence by suggesting 430 feet. So I think by minimizing and making it more restrictive, I think that seems reasonable.
So if there seems to be some consensus around a couple of things. One is, because what it sounds like we might be moving towards, or one potential motion here would be to actually change the conditional use condition with respect to the length of the fence, as well as with respect to the opacity. Is that a word? opaqueness. And so the proposed motions we have at our disposal, one is to leave the condition as written, and the other is to recommend changing the condition. So we're percolating a change in the condition with respect to these things and actually making it less severe on length and more severe in terms of a solid fence. Are we in it, so we could, are we in a position, so can we do a motion? Can we talk through a motion? That's the next step. I'm sorry, after, go ahead, sorry.
So the only thing I was gonna say was, looking at the fence that was put in there, to your point of, it's been very clear of what the initial expectation was as it's written in the CUP, but the fence that was put up as what was thought to be a compromise, it didn't remove the chain link fence next to it, which should have probably been done. So that concerns me in terms of how this is gonna get done and when it's gonna get done. So I think in addition to some of these changes, there should be some sort of, or I don't know if we can put some sort of reasonable time limit in terms of getting this done.
So that's where the occupancy permit comes into play. So we could actually we could include that into our motion, that it may be reasserting something that's already there, but that's probably okay, right?
Yeah, that'd be actually good to do to clarify.
All right, so is there anything else, or should we talk out a motion?
Well,
I'm gonna make a motion.
when you're talking solid fences, and this again goes back to what the fence looks like. The nice thing about the fence that's up there, it looks the same from both sides. When you get into a solid fence, somebody's got the flat side, somebody has the post side, or what type of solid fence are you looking at? And what that would always, would end up looking like, either from the church side or from the Lovering side. It's just another aesthetic look of what the fence is gonna end out looking like, because it's not the same from both sides when you go to a solid fence. That's why, by doing a fence similar to what was there, but making the boards maybe closer together versus, so that even at a 45-degree angle, you don't see light through them, is a possibility also. I don't know, again, it would be like solid, but not.
Does the fence design need to be approved by the city?
The fences will need to be approved. And for our city code states that the finished side of the fence, or the fence that doesn't have any of the framing or skeleton, has to show to your neighbor.
Okay.
And so it'll be flush looking, if it's solid, to the neighbor's side. That's the requirement.
One thing that I think would be helpful to explore too is to consider, of all the different design materials and construction processes, what's going to be the fence that has the longest life? Because I can imagine they're not going to want to address this again and again if there's maintenance issues. They've already done this several times, and so thinking about a fence that's going to last a long time, maintenance free, is really going to be something that I think if we have the ability to encourage or request, that's not the worst idea.
Do we have to go to Brazil to get the trees now?
I don't think so.
But of course, the original intent was to be a good neighbor to the homeowners to the north. And that was the reason for the fence, was to accommodate the neighbors as a good neighbor, and identifying the problem. And so the fence was very well defined, but not documented, unfortunately. But I think the intent of the fence was very, very well defined to solve a problem for the neighbor to the north. And I think that's what has to be viewed as the objective.
Agreed.
I want to throw out, again, the discrepancy between these two lengths, because it'll be in the motion, right? The city council, in 2014 and 2017, their intention was a 630, around, approximately 630-foot fence, an entire length of the property line, right? Or not the property line, but all the way down to the lake. So there's talk that there has been a compromise. I don't know that we have any firm sort of documentation about that. But I think the first part of that we either need to reassert what the city council said in 2014 and 2017 with respect to the length, or change it. Thoughts on that?
I think we just reassert what the conditional use permit was from 2014, 2017. And then,
The full length?
well, as far as a conditional use, and then if there would be an amendment to that, I mean, with the agreement of the two property owners, to go shorter, but that would basically be between them. But the chain link fence would stay either way. I mean, would still go the length that's there, you just wouldn't remove the rest of it.
As I see it, number one, it's not opaque. So, when it was installed, it was never opaque. So, first of all, it was supposed to be the whole length. They didn't do that. They left the chain link fence. They didn't do what was required of them. So technically, the whole thing is not in compliance. So if the property owner wants to hold firm and say we want the whole length of the fence, they can. Legally, I think they can. So I would say that Mount Olivet, it would be in their best interest to say, okay, we can agree to 430 because that seems more reasonable.
Your opinion is that we make a change, we change it to the shorter length?
That is
Change
what
the
I think the
requirement.
city recommends, yes. It's planning commission. That is my opinion.
Okay. I'll make a counter argument, which is, I think it's important in this case in particular because I don't think there's been good faith on the part of the church here to get this done. They've been told multiple times over years to get this done. It hasn't gotten done. We have leverage right now in terms of they're going to want their occupancy permit, obviously. And I think it sets a bad precedent that running out the clock can get you a compromise. I would be in favor of upholding what the city council said in 2014 and 2017 and adding some language with respect to the opaqueness of the fence. So there's two, so maybe what we want to do is we want to have, we might have more than one motion here, right? So if I move my version, we can vote on that. And if that doesn't pass, then the next motion would be essentially the same motion except for a shorter length. And then we can, I mean, that might be a way to go.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay.
Is there any more discussion?
I have one quick question. The Leverlings, I'm curious if they have changed their mind and they still, if they had their way, if they would have the longer distance of the fence line versus the 430, with all things considered and how construction is done today.
Can we ask a question? Can they come back up and answer a question
Yes.
at this point? Okay.
If that is the purview of the planning commission.
Right. Would you like to come up and address that question?
We're still supportive of the church expanding. We've been extraordinarily frustrated by this process, but we would still compromise on the 430 feet because there's a natural break and a north-south running additional chain link fence there. There's a lot of chain link fences in there, but there's a natural break of a north-south running chain link fence that they could marry up to. So we would still be willing to compromise.
Any other discussion? Would somebody like to propose a motion? I'm happy to do it. Okay, so make sure, gentlemen, that I get this right. I'm going to propose a motion to recommend to the city council that the condition be changed to require a 430-foot fence per the compromise that took place in 2018, and that the fence, also condition be changed that the fence not be classified as opaque, but be classified as solid.
I think we want to use 2017, not 18.
Well, there was yeah.
Oh, was there a letter?
I don't even know if we need to even reference a compromise,
Okay.
but, so the motion is to change the condition to requiring not a fence that replaces the entire chain link fence, but replaces the 430 feet of the chain link fence, and that fence not be classified as opaque, but rather be classified as solid. Yes, sir.
Would you want to add on the condition that it has to be installed before the issuance of
Yes.
occupancy?
Absolutely. And, thank you, and that this condition is a requirement prior to occupancy, whatever the right language is for that. That's the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Thank you. Okay.
So is the fence to be installed as an extension of where the fence is now, or where the chain link fence is, just so I know?
The fence that's there now, the cedar is
Yeah.
not in compliance with this motion.
Correct, so
So it has
we're
to be removed.
And replace with the solid, but then we can extend it right there, the rest of the 430 feet, is that what I'm
No,
clear?
it's
I
gotta-
just wanna make sure I'm putting it attached to I'm putting it in the right spot for.
No, it's gotta go all the way up to Rolling Acres Road.
Okay, perfect.
Right. It's the 430 feet as outlined in this exhibit here.
Perfect.
From Rolling Acres, 430 feet down to, it looks like maybe 40, 50 feet past the back of their house.
Correct, okay, but
Can we continue to discuss, I mean, I want to make sure we stay within.
Again, it's up to the planning
Okay,
commission
all
if
right,
you want some
all right.
clarification.
Everything's,
So,
But Chris, you have to come up with the microphone, I'm sorry.
yeah,
Okay.
use my.
so we would request that 430 feet is from the start of the chain link fence at Rolling Acres to the second north-south chain link fence, approximately 430.
Does this exhibit accurately reflect where those 2 points are in your, they may not be precisely to scale, but.
So there's one chain link fence here, and here's the second chain link fence down here. So I don't know, so that's 430 feet, then it's gotta come to here. So it needs to,
Oh, there's a north-south chain link fence.
yeah, so, and I think the fence is not quite, I don't know where I think the chain link fence ends there or something like that. Might end there, so maybe it's not 430 feet, but
Well, we're gonna change the wording then, so it doesn't talk about the feet, but talks about the boundaries. To the chain link fence on the west.
Is a survey required to get this fence installed?
A survey would be produced. So, for example, this is considered a survey. And so that would be superimposed upon this sort of survey and then produced to the city for verification to a certain degree. In most fence situations, so I process pretty much all the fences. Usually it's property line to property line, so it's not usually controversial. Here we'd probably have to go into a fair amount of analysis, probably on-site. Typically we don't do on-site inspections unless there's controversy. In this case, there probably would be on-site inspection. We have a global GPS item, it's a tremble. We'd probably have to take marks and make sure that they're in the right spot. Of course, the diagram that you're seeing here is a facsimile of a reduced-sized survey, and so scaling can be a little interpretive. We have a program called Bluebeam that we use to help scale it for us. Typically, it's within 5 to 10% accurate for most of our work. So you could probably take this about 5 to 10%.
What is the process at this point for, if we were to, wanted to amend the recommendation we just voted on?
So the person who made the motion would want to clarify the motion.
Okay. Okay.
What I could read to you is, maybe this will help. Change the condition to require a chain link fence from the require a solid fence. So a condition to require a solid fence from the beginning of the chain link fence near Rolling Acres Road to the second chain link fence that runs north and south, roughly 430 feet in length. Removing the existing chain link fence of the same length and be installed before issuance of occupancy permit.
Did it say solid in there as well?
Yes.
I would like to suggest that the only section that's modified is where instead of 430 feet, we say 504 feet plus or minus 10%.
So it's the second north-south fence. Okay, so we can say that as a point of reference, and then,
Right.
okay, so as the person who did the initial motion, I'd like to clarify the motion, that it states that the fence goes to the second north-south chain link fence that is adjacent, approximately 503 feet in length. So that's been moved, now we need to second and go to that, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we've amended that motion, yes.
Would we want to add something about minimal tree impact, or, so that, so that they aren't cutting the 10-foot or 12-foot or cutting all the trees down to put this fence up. Since they were able to put the fence up, with less than a 5-foot, I mean, I'm thinking of a width of a skid loader, to be able to haul material or do stuff, should be the width that they should be able to build that fence in.
I don't know how we,
Yeah, staff's only concern is it's very difficult to quantify. So if you put a suggestion like that or a condition in there, it's open to staff's interpretation of what is significant. So what we would recommend is that you just follow what the tree preservation ordinance requires, and that is they can remove trees up to
8 inches.
8 inches in caliper, and after that they have to get permission from the city. And if they do take trees that are over 8 inches in caliper, they have to replace them on site or pay into the tree fund.
And we do want a maximum amount of definition in the proposal to cover all bases that.
well, I think because there's some teeth to this recommendation, because it reasserts that the occupancy permit is contingent on satisfying this. So I don't think this is gonna continue to go on and on and on, because obviously they're gonna wanna move into their new building as soon as possible, so. And I don't think it's in their interest to clear cut, and, like they're gonna wanna preserve as much as they can. Okay, so should I make that motion? Are you able to put that on the screen for me to just read?
No, sorry. I could read it for you and you
Okay.
just repeat it.
Okay.
So recommend the city council change the condition to require a solid fence from the beginning of the chain link fence near Rolling Acres Road to the second chain link fence that runs north-south, roughly 503 feet in length, removing the existing chain link fence and install the solid fence prior to issuance of occupancy permit.
Okay, so moved. Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none?
Good.
Okay, hearing none, so that motion passes.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is council meeting updates. Staff, who are these updates that you're going to give us?
We're a historical.
We have, I think, one more additional item.
Oh, we do? I'm sorry.
I think so.
Two more.
Oh, I just skipped right over B and C. I'm sorry. Okay, so the next item is historic downtown improvements.
Just be one moment while you transition.
Sure. Which one is it? It's one of those two. Yep, that one. Yep. Thanks. Okay. So, Chair, members of the Planning Commission, since most of you are new at the Planning Commission, and since this was a light agenda, staff thought we'd have a couple presentations that may be of interest to the Planning Commission. First one was a presentation that staff gave to the City Council back in November of 2017, and it really shows that the significant changes have been made in the downtown. Again, I've started a year ago, so these are all new to me, and when you watch the video or the slideshow, it's pretty impressive what has happened in the downtown. So this is Rose Street, looking towards Steiger Lake. And again, what they were trying to do back in the 2016 when they adopted the downtown master plan was to create a downtown that's walkable destination for the community. Parking, having on-street parking wherever possible with street reconstruction projects, and constructing public surface parking lots in strategic locations. Revenue and resources, what they use to pay for a lot of this is the TIF districts. Taking some of the money that was generated in the TIF and use that to install the roads and the utilities that are required. This is what the looks like Rose Street looks like now, with new curb and gutter, with the lights on either side, with a new parking lot. This is, that's the creamery in the foreground. I think this is Steiger Lake Lane, I believe. And that's what it looks like now. Again, with the planting of the trees, adding the sidewalk, the lights. This is...
Are these before pictures all the same year? All taken-
different years. So all these have happened over a period of 10 years. And so what staff would do is go out and take a picture of before the construction and then take a picture afterwards. So that's Steiger Lake Lane looking the other way. This is Victoria Drive looking toward the intersection of Victoria and Highway 5. That's what it looks like now. I think so many of these pictures, when you look at them, you totally forget what they look like. So this is Randy's Way, looking towards north to Steiger Lake Lane, the Steiger Lake. That's Randy's Way. This is what the old City Hall building looked like. And that's the City Hall with the band shell and the Lakeside building. And again, this goes back to the big question back in 2016 when they created the downtown master plan of what does the city envision for downtown. What they're trying to stay away from is what you typically see in Chanhassen, and that's stores surrounded by surface parking lots. That are a lot of times underused. Strip malls such as this. They're just vast landscapes. So I thought it was interesting to see that the positives that have happened over the last 10 years. A lot of times, these developments happen incrementally, and so when you see it in the big picture, it's very interesting. Any questions on that?
This picture actually doesn't have Victoria Flats on it.
No, it's an older one.
A little older too.
This is prior to the Victoria Flats. And then the other slideshow I wanted to present was something that I presented to the Planning Commission about 5-6 months ago. But one of the things that is going to be coming to the Victoria in the near future is the state highway study of Highway 5, and it's called the Arboretum Study. And with Carver County, the state, and Victoria and Chaska are doing a study in Chanhassen too of what's the long-term needs for Highway 5 in Rolling Acres, so County Road 13. So one of the things that staff would like to highlight is some of the ideas behind streets and appropriate streets. And a lot of times when you look at the streets, what I always suggest is how does that impact pedestrians? Because if you design streets for the pedestrians, you usually end up with a pretty nice street. So this one it's all about pedestrians. Why is it important to accommodate pedestrians? One, because we're all pedestrians, because it will make roads safer, because many cannot drive, because it's good for business, because other modes of transportation depend on walking. People seek out streets like this, but we've built streets like this. Roadway design and other factors that affect walking. The roadway width, site distance, access management, site design, street connectivity, land use, and parking, of course. Take a tired 5-lane commercial strip and add some landscaping. It's the same width, but it's a lot more pleasant to walk down, to bike along, to be a pedestrian along that road. Choosing the appropriate street width, what people consider road diets, and dictating space to other uses, such as on-street parking, a median, bike lanes along the streets. Early examples are the bike lanes that have been used in roads. This is an example of converting a 4-lane to a 3-lane conversion and then using that center turn lane as a island for when people cross streets, which is very advantageous, helpful. Skinny streets preserve valuable space for better uses. One of our requirements, our subdivision ordinance requires, is a roadway width of 28 feet. So that does it's a pretty narrow street for most suburbs. So it does accommodate the less amount of hard cover and more use of usable space. Designing a wide street poorly is intimidating, but designing a wide street well works. People drive. Where will we park all those cars? Surface parking lots are not an inefficient use of land. Parking garages are more efficient, but they don't have to be ugly. One of the recommendations is when you have a parking garage is to have some type of storefront retail space to get that street, the sidewalk level active. Interesting. Parking on or off street. Some of the advantages of having on-street parking, which again, this is what is recommended or encouraged through the downtown master plan, is on-street parking wherever possible. On-street parking adds an additional buffer width. It's a traffic calming, slower speeds. A lot of times traffic will go much slower when there's parking on the street because you're always worried about somebody opening up a car door. So you are going slower. Whereas if there's no parking on the street, people speed. Commercial business districts are commercially viable, access to more destinations. There's an incentive to orientate businesses towards the street. A lot of times if you have a commercial business and there's no street parking, they'll put the front door in the back. So when you're driving down a street and there's no street parking, a lot of times you won't see much activity in that commercial space. So having that street parking is very important just for the design of the urban design of downtown. On-street parking reduces the need for off-street parking and driveways to access off-street parking, and it increases the activity on the street. The other thing, the benefit that's not even listed here is the on-street parking is a great way for the mixed uses of buildings to use that common parking. Otherwise, what you go back to the Chanhassen model, and every building has its own parking because nobody has on-street parking. But if you have a public on-street parking, people are able to use that space, even though you have an office and a restaurant and a retail space that might have different hours and different needs, but people are using the spaces in different times. So a good street accommodates many uses. We used to build great streets, but things have changed. So hopefully, when the study comes along in Highway 5 and County Road 13, the Planning Commission gets involved, and we'll let you know when all the open house meetings are. But these are just some thoughts to keep in mind when we're reviewing those plans. Any comments on that?
My only thought is the sprawl, what's the right terminology? The suburbs have been created as a result of Minneapolis, right? So you have the cute, quaint sidewalks that were originated in Minnesota, probably in Minneapolis, or roundabout, right? But then you get people that move further out because it's less cost of living, and so they have a further distance to travel for work. So they don't want really slow speeds because they have further distances to travel for work. So it gets a little trickier, right? I mean, that design element of cute, narrow streetways when people have long distances to travel. And that's what we are. We're a bedroom community. So, I don't know. It's a fine balance. Yeah.
Elusive balance.
Yeah.
And there's different, even some of the examples they show when they just put landscaping on the thoroughfare, and there's no storefronts and there was no parking on-street parking there. But you're right, there's different roads for different types of uses.
Yeah.
I think
You wouldn't want to put on-street parking on Highway 5.
Right.
But for downtown and for downtown west, that's appropriate.
And one of the things I always think about with stuff like this is that you just don't get a second chance at a lot of these things.
No.
Right? Like, we'll never get a chance to put retail in that building or restaurants or anything to just liven up. I mean, that building will always, as good as it is for all kinds of reasons, it will always be a dead end to the east edge of this part of downtown.
Mm-hmm.
We'll never have a chance to go back and fix that, right? And so if we this is why, I guess it's an obvious statement, this is why these decisions are so important. Because it speaks directly to the livability of, particularly the downtown area. To your point, 97% of Victoria is residential, right? And so this area that we have here is really important. We got to make sure we protect it and don't get any of those ugly street scenes right down here.
I'm on our HOA and a neighborhood discussion, and actually a discussion with the board members in the HOA is the fact that so we will have an old downtown, which of course is here, and then we'll have a new downtown, which is further south, and I think that's kind of the reality of I mean, how much room do we have here to accommodate the incredible growth that's going to occur. And you can take we get down to the far west suburbs of Chicago on a fairly regular basis, and here's this quaint little downtown, and then there's a shopping area that's 4 miles away. That's really kind of the downtown in terms of the shops and whatnot. But and I think that will be our situation here.
That makes me think of something. Where are we at with I think the city was trying to get the city council to approve a concept plan for the Engler and Victoria Drive commercial property. Did that get approved?
Engler. You mean south of the railroad tracks?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Right, yes. So, it was discussed at the city council strategic planning session about coming up with a small area plan. So staff went out and, sent RFPs to 5 planning consultants. We received 3 proposals. We selected one, but then we're bringing that proposal to the city council at their next meeting and recommending that they, hire that particular consultant.
Okay.
Yeah. That was one of my information pieces to let you know. So, which is really exciting because, again, it's a very important piece for Victoria because we only have one commercial office area that's designated, and we need to do it right. And so having the consultant discussing it with developers who are maybe interested, but to give us some insight to what the market would support. Would the market support 4-story office buildings? We don't really know that. It's in our comprehensive plan, but it'd be nice to hear it from some developers who actually build them to say, yes, that the city can anticipate 4-story office buildings down here. So it's going to be exciting. It's in the next 4 or 5 months.
Does the city have capacity to purchase that land and just hold it until the right development comes? Kind of like what we've done over here?
Well, that 13.5 acres cost $1 million, and what we're talking about is 350 acres. So I don't think the city has capacity to buy all that land.
No, and it's not that much land. I mean, through the commercially zoned land, it's a lot less than 350 acres.
Well, all the commercial is about a third of that. So it's about 100 acres of commercial, 80 acres of commercial, and the rest is office flex.
We could pick off the best spots.
The key intersections.
Yeah.
But to quote John, we cannot make any mistakes
Right. Yeah.
because it is permanent.
No redos. Okay, council so is that, Pat, is that the end of your presentation?
Yeah, then the other thing in the miscellaneous, I was talking about the small area office plan or small area plan. Just the update on the downtown development is we are trying to apply for a livable development grant from the Met Council that we can get up to $2 million to pay for some of the infrastructure for the downtown west. We anticipate the infrastructure would be in $4.5 million, so it'd be about half of the infrastructure that the city is going to be paying to get that going. And then in partnership at the same time, we're talking with developers. Our goal is to get 2 or 3 developers on board before we ever start putting in the infrastructure. But the goal is to apply for the grant, which is due, the concept plan for the grant is due July 1st, and then the full grant is due August 8th. So in the next couple months, we should get some activity going for the downtown west.
Previously, had proposals from developers considered that their cost?
What's
That infrastructure that you mentioned?
well, it's very difficult because, as you can see, some of the developments that are occurring here, that even with the TIF and the infrastructure that's already in there, that it's very, very difficult to make those things work out.
Mm-hmm.
So we're having our financial consultant from Northland Securities kind of review these proposals, so to make sure that their pro forma makes sense for what they're getting in the rents and then for construction costs, so that we're not putting too much money into it.
I have one additional question. Where are we at in terms of the utilities being installed along Victoria Drive for the lift station and those items?
They're still doing the planning stages, the study. The council hasn't given the authored for the installation yet.
Okay.
And again, this is kind of like the juggling act, because you don't want to author the installation unless you have developers who are committed to doing it, and the developers don't want to commit it unless the city authorizes the installation.
Yep.
I know that 2 developers are still looking at their pro forma on that, and trying to make sure it works.
Okay.
Okay, next item is council meeting updates. Who provides the council meeting updates?
I sent out a list for people to attend, but if you don't make it, it's not a big deal because either Paul and I are there. So if somebody attended the May 28th meeting, they could report on that. Otherwise, I could report on it.
I watched the video.
Well, on the May 28th meeting, there was discussion about the ash borer tree study that the city had requested and came back with on whether it's better to treat the ash borer or replace the trees. And they just kind of came back with different slides on how much it would cost and what it would, what their reality was, that trees like 10 inches or greater were worth treating, some are worth just letting, cutting them down or letting them go. There was really no definition of what the staff was to do, as far as they didn't recommend treating them or going ahead. I think there was some more discussion on whether to pursue that. There was also a discussion on the valet parking downtown, and how it's been going and how it got started. And I think, to me, the valet parking on the will come to more, be used more probably in the wintertime or inclement weather versus when it's nice out and people are fine with walking. But I don't know if you've gotten any more reports on valet parking, or
No, but
if they've kind of,
you reminded me of the other thing I was going to mention, though, is so one of the things you may not be aware of is that the Planning Commission is kind of the group that has been given the task to come up with a solution for the parking in the downtown. We did a parking study last fall. It came up with some recommendations. The City Council adopted some policies, and one of those policies is the Planning Commission kind of implement those recommendations. One of the recommendations was for the business owners to get together and have some valet parking. And 3 restaurant owners have hired a valet company. And the City Council at the May 28th meeting designated 3 spots for valet parking only, from 4 to 11 on Fridays and Saturdays. And there would be north of the clock tower. And then the other thing I was going to mention is, again, one of the policies in the parking task force that was adopted by the City Council was a routine parking count done every other year. And so now that Winchester and Rye is open, staff will be making parking counts in the next 3 months and compare those parking counts to the parking counts that were completed for the parking task force. And it's just a good gauge to find out how much parking is being used. Do we still have a parking deficit? Is there a surplus at all? When those surpluses are occurring? So staff will be making those parking counts, and we'll make that presentation to the Planning Commission and Council.
I don't know if it's an appropriate time to bring this up, but the parking sign right here,
Yes.
do you know what it would say?
Yep.
Turn the wrong way.
Right.
Okay, everybody knows that.
Truck hit it.
Oh, it actually isn't supposed to be that way?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Truck hit it once, and we put it back, and another truck hit it again. So now what we're going to do is we're going to ask the electrician to make sure it works, but to put it perpendicularly the other way, so that it doesn't hang over the sidewalk, or not the sidewalk, but it doesn't hang over the curb, and trucks won't hit it anymore.
So smart figuring that out.
I walk by it every day.
So, quick question, north of the clock tower is where the valet parking is. That's the skinny little row of parking that's in between Winchester and Rye and where,
School of the Wise.
School of the Wise, I mean,
Correct.
that's where the valet parking
It's,
is, huh?
and it's closer to the, well, one, they wanted it centrally located. So before the first 3 weekends, they were using it behind, in the Rose Street parking lot and behind the Nonerman building. And the valet, Minneapolis Valet company owner suggested that it's so far away and people weren't using it as much as they should be. He believes that they'll get a lot more use having it centrally located. In the planning, or the Public Works and Engineering looked at it and said that would be an appropriate spot from traffic wise. And if traffic is disrupted too much, we'll know about it and we could always move it. But that's centrally located from the 3 businesses. And the other thing is just which is, I think, is a pretty unique and interesting, is that any business can use the valet parking. It's $5 per person or per car, and anybody can use it for the Burrows or any other
Where do
restaurant.
the cars get parked?
They're parking them down Steiger Lake Lane.
Oh, there, I'm
Right.
sorry, I was thinking
That's
that's
just
where
where
the
you-
cars were being
No,
parked.
that's
I'm
just
like,
where you drop your car off.
Right, that's where,
that is
There's 3
way
spots being-
more
yeah,
helpful, okay.
yes, that's where you drop your,
Goodness.
Wouldn't accommodate much valet parking.
Are these
Sorry, we're
business-
full.
Are these business owners happy with this?
So they're taking up the town?
That is a,
Parking there?
okay,
No.
Yeah,
that's
it-
relief, okay,
and
good.
then they're also using the Hartman office building. They have a large parking, the surface parking lot. They're parking some
Great.
cars there.
Good, that's great.
Any other council meeting updates?
In June 10th, the council approved the R1 and R2 zoning changes that were recommended by the planning commission. They approved the Laketown 12th final plat, which were the villas. They approved the replat of Laketown 11th. They eliminated 4 lots. And it's called Laketown 14th. And then they appointed Terry to be on the planning commission.
And we should have brought this up at the beginning. You mentioned it, I failed to do it, but welcome Terry to the planning.
Oh, thanks.
Welcome.
Also audit in that 10th meeting as well, right, was presented,
Right. They did.
which I thought was really interesting.
They talked about a stop sign. I talked at great length over a stop sign near the high school.
High school.
Okay. Okay, so if we can move past number 4, are there any miscellaneous items? There are none on the agenda. So can we move to adjourn? Okay, I move to adjourn the June 18th meeting of the Planning Commission. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you.
Good job.